Hello and welcome to the Sunday Recap Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Jason Gilbo at Jason Gilbo 11, and I keep having problems with your Twitter handle because I keep messing up the numbers and everything like that. But I got it now, so we're good to go. And we're going to be recapping all the games from Sunday. Some of them obviously were exciting. Some things that actually mattered happened, and then there was a whole lot of letdown from some popular plays and some defenses in particular. So starting off with one that didn't have a whole lot going on, Texans and the Panthers. Greg Olsen, as you mentioned here in your article, finally bounced back, 6 catches for 70 yards, 14 targets, so he only got half his targets. And, this is a scenario where this is a Texans team is going to change a lot next week, where we're assuming Arian Foster is going to come back. And, on the Panthers side, outside of Greg Olsen, really not much to see in this one.
Yeah, Cam Newton had a nice game on the ground, 70 yards, had 3 total touchdowns, which is nice because that's the upside he brings. But, I'm never a big Cam Newton fan each week, especially against a pretty solid Texans defense. So that was pretty unexpected for me. But I didn't really play a whole ton of guys in this game at all.
Yeah, I didn't either. I had a couple shares of DeAndre Hopkins, and that was about it for me. Next up was one that hopefully you did have a part of it, really both sides, but one side wasn't one that people were targeting much. The 49ers and the Steelers. We all knew Antonio Brown versus Julio Jones was one of the bigger debates of the week. You were unlikely you were going to get both in any lineup, but you had Antonio Brown over Julio Jones. Not to say that Julio Jones didn't do well. We'll get to him in a second, but Antonio Brown finished with almost 200 yards, scored a touchdown, and it was late too. I think it was a 23-point game when he scored that, but Ben Roethlisberger had another huge game, 21 for 27, 369 and 3 scores. DeAngelo Williams kept stealing everyone's touchdowns that were not named Antonio Brown. We saw the one throw where Roethlisberger underthrew Antonio Brown when he was wide open, past the safety. He had to come back to get the ball, still almost got in the end zone, and then we just wait for DeAngelo Williams to steal the touchdown. But, Steelers scoring points of bunches, and now Le'Veon Bell coming back next week. So this is a scary offense, and not that you played Colin Kaepernick. I don't know if anyone did, but he had a hell of a game too, mostly in garbage time, though.
Yeah, he did, and, he had that long ball to Torrey Smith there, which kind of send him over the edge, but he did throw the ball pretty nice. Granted, it was all garbage time, but Carlos Hyde, pretty popular value play this week, ended up leaving the game, but didn't really have much going anyway. And you figure with the way the game was flowing, he wasn't going to see a ton of yards on the ground anyway. But like I said, Steelers' offense is scary.
Yeah, that was one of those situations. I had Carlos Hyde more than I'd like to admit, and I saw him come out. I wasn't watching that game. I kind of assumed that it was a product of the game flow, that the game was out of hand kind of thing, because he's not much of a pass catcher. He did get 4 catches in this game, but I kind of assumed that he just was taken out because of the score, and then you find out that he's hurt. So not that makes you feel any better, but at least you realize he's not just standing on the sideline watching. So, the damage was done by that point, though. The Bucs and Saints, one of the more surprising games this week. We saw Tampa Bay get slaughtered week 1 by Marcus Mariota, almost all in the first half, lost by 4 touchdowns. Then they come in as double-digit underdogs, or I think the line might have been 9.5 by the end. But everyone looking at the Saints for some value, everyone looking at Drew Brees to have a big game, and it didn't happen. Pretty much nothing happened on the New Orleans Saints side. They were not the worst offense. We'll get to that team here near the end, but they just looked terrible. Nobody moved the ball. Drew Brees, now they're talking about how potentially he's going to be missing time, maybe significant time, maybe even the season, depending on what rumor you're listening to. So this is a Saints team that's in big trouble now.
Yeah, we kind of lucked out with a Mark Ingram touchdown if you played him, and we really could have had 2, but he had one vultured late in the game at the 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, Brees and company did not look good. I wasn't really a fan of Brandon Cooks coming into the week, even though I saw him being kind of highly touted as the guy to pair up with Brees. I had some Coleman shares hoping for a cheap touchdown there, but cash games, they were filled with Brees and everyone else, and that's disappointing.
Yeah, and the other chalk play that we'll get to in here in a couple minutes didn't help people a lot. I had quite a bit of Brandon Coleman, which got that early 22-yard catch. It looked like a great start, and then I don't think he caught on their ball until either late 3rd or early 4th, so that was ugly. And Jameis Winston played much better. Not that he could have, played much worse than he did in week 1, but he was better. Obviously not someone that many people had, but he was a guy that if you played him in some tournaments could have really set you apart, but it wasn't like he put up numbers that are going to individually win you a GPP. He wasn't that good. Lions and Vikings next up. this was another one that featured an injury. We saw Matt Stafford now. We don't know how long he's out. He's got an injury to his chest. They're getting x-rays, I think, today. And Adrian Peterson, after week 1, we see everyone with their classic overreactions. Adrian Peterson's over 30 years old, and he's done, and he's got no upside. And then he was the workhorse in this one, as we expected. Had a huge game. I mean, he had 134 yards and 29 carries and 58 yards on a couple catches. So he had some big-time numbers there. Obviously, Teddy Bridgewater's numbers weren't big, but they didn't need to be. And the Lions just don't look good. I mean, first half of that game, week 1, they looked good, and since then they just look terrible.
Yeah, and I think the guy to talk about, Calvin Johnson got his looks finally. Got 17 targets after a pretty disappointing week 1. But, we were kind of looking for Amir Abdullah there. Didn't get targeted at all this game. I think he had, a couple rushing yards and wasn't featured in the passing game despite being down early in the game. So it's kind of disappointing.
Yeah, it was pretty baffling. He was the guy that I mixed into some GPPs and even heard some people talking about him as cash game play. And, after his week 1 performance, I think he only had 11 touches, but he played well. And Lions just, once again, just not utilizing the key players they have and not focusing on their strengths. And that's especially going to be really bad if Stafford ends up missing time and we get Mr. Dan Orlovsky in there trying to throw the ball around. And it's going to be a real ugly situation there pretty quickly. Another injury in this next one seems like that's the theme, but the more important thing here was Carson Palmer to Larry Fitzgerald again and again and again. 3 touchdowns. I mean, this was the Larry Fitzgerald we remember seeing years and years ago. We're talking 6-7 years since I remember seeing a game like this from him. And I mean, the 3 touchdowns, and they weren't cheap touchdowns. I mean, he was earning them. He was catching short passes and dragging defenders. And Carson Palmer, despite not throwing for many yards, if you throw for 4 touchdowns, really doesn't matter how many yards you put up because you're putting up a nice fantasy week anyway. Yeah,
and I had a couple of Carson Palmer, Larry Fitzgerald teams, and they're really holding on. And I kind of looked out because I didn't have too much going on in Eagles-Cowboys down the road. So they really paid off if you play both of them. And thing to look at, I mean, people probably paired John Brown quite a bit with him being, Palmer's kind of go-to guy that we've seen. But hopefully Fitzgerald can establish himself moving forward.
Yeah, he was the guy that I'll admit to not having very many shares of him. I think he was only on 1 or 2 of my teams, and I wish I had more, but I whiffed on that one. And Bears situation, Jay Cutler, I kind of laughed to myself when I got one of the notifications from, I think it's NFL.com or something, and it said, Jay Cutler leaves game with apparent injury. I kind of thought he just wanted a smoke break. Maybe he was hungry. Just didn't feel like playing because the game was out of hand like we've seen from Jay Cutler. But apparently it's a hamstring injury. I heard earlier he's expected to probably miss 2 weeks. I don't know if that's official, but this is another situation. I mean, Alshon Jeffrey was out, but then you bring in Jimmy Clausen, and this is professional football. So Jimmy Clausen, not the guy you want to see coming out, especially in this offense that was kind of struggling anyway. So it's another one of those situations, another NFC North team that just doesn't have a very bright future right now.
Nope.
Yeah, it looks like the Packers going to be running away with that division.
Yeah.
Another division we thought we were going to see a nice battle in, and it seems like the Patriots just go ahead and assert their dominance on everyone. As soon as anyone thinks that they're down, they just come in and just destroy teams. And everyone thought this was going to be a slugfest. I don't know hardly anyone that played very much Tom Brady. Obviously, Gronkowski, Edelman, guys like that were pretty popular. And Gronk not as much as he is in most weeks, but we saw 19 targets for Julian Edelman, 13 for Gronk. Dion Lewis has looked great. And this was a Bills defense that looked literally impenetrable week 1. And Tom Brady just did whatever the hell he wanted. 466 yards for him in this one. And Tyrod Taylor turned the ball over a lot, but almost led a miracle comeback. So from a DFS perspective, that was good. But, I mean, the game wasn't ever really in doubt late.
No, I mean, Tyrod Taylor, 4 touchdowns. I mean, not bad, but did have, 3 picks, a couple fumbles. Sammy Watkins found the end zone for probably the only time he's going to see it all season. Once again, McCoy, pretty lackluster. I'm not a big fan of McCoy. There's just too many other options at running back to ever really get him in any lineups at all. But like you said, Pat's pretty dominant.
Yeah, McCoy's one of those guys, if you had to draft him in a season-long league, you feel okay about it. But through 2 weeks, I haven't rostered him in the single lineup. And, I mean, obviously he hasn't even scored a touchdown because he's been down there even when he's gotten the ball at the goal line. He's been stopped, and then you just let Carlos Williams, someone else vulture his touchdown. So that's been the theme with him even when he was in Philadelphia too. So that's a pass for me. Chargers and Bengals was a fun one. We saw Stevie Johnson once again have a nice value type performance. We saw Jeremy Hill, who was one of a really popular cash game play. Everyone expected him to have a big game. Bengals relied on him a lot before and put the ball on the ground twice and kind of looked like he got hurt on that second fumble. I was watching the game. That's what I thought originally. Then come to find out he was just benched for fumbling. And to my surprise, and maybe the surprise of others, Giovanni Bernard came in. And, I mean, not only was he elusive, but he was strong. He was breaking tackles. And, I mean, he looked like he wanted to be out there. And I'm hearing speculation that it's maybe a timeshare now. And I'm not a believer in that. I just think Giovanni was asked to step up, and he looked great. Yeah,
I hope not, because I have plenty of Jeremy Hill shares in season long. And Hill was a guy I paired with Forte and was just burned in cash games with both of them. But, Bernard's still going to be the pass catch guy out of the backfield, but I think he'll regain his 20 carries a game on the ground going forward. The passing game, impressive yet again. They're going to face a Ravens defense next week. That's allowed a ton of points to Derek Carr. So if Dalton and Green can't get it done next week for a bigger game, it's not something I'm going to have a lot of stock in going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, as a Bengals fan personally, I'm thrilled to see Dalton. I mean, no turnovers and no sacks over 2 weeks. So, I mean, obviously we've seen this story before. He's looked good before and plummeted when it mattered. But definitely some reason for optimism from the team standpoint, but maybe not so much from a DFS standpoint, like you mentioned with Green. I mean, when you're spreading the ball around that much, you got two backs that are involved in the passing game. It's hard to find a lot of targets you feel really good about. But Tyler Eifert, it took him a while, but I mean, he paid off once again. So that's a nice target there too. Titans and the Browns. As a lot of people know, my least favorite player, Johnny Manziel, went out, threw a touchdown on his first pass. I was getting tweets and texts and everything from everyone about Johnny's a god. How do you hate on Johnny Manziel and all this? And I mean, he completed 8 whole passes in the game. So, I mean, as great as he may or may not have been, he pretty much just threw the ball up for grabs twice in single coverage to Travis Benjamin, and Benjamin just could not be stopped. So give credit where credit is due. Travis Benjamin single-handedly won this game. He had a punt return for a touchdown too. So Johnny Manziel didn't really need to be there for Travis Benjamin to win this game for the Browns.
No, a couple of lucky toss-ups there for Manziel. But looking at the other side, I mean, Mariota, not a great QB rating for this game, but turned the ball over with fumbles, but still threw the ball pretty well against a pretty tough defense. And I believe he was on the Millionaire Maker winning team for some time up there at the top, which was kind of interesting. But there was too many other players that really helped him out. But this game wasn't on my radar. Really shouldn't have been on anyone's.
No, and I can't wait to see the classic overreactions of everyone play Travis Benjamin next week. He does have 3 long touchdowns, 4 total, I guess, when you consider the punt return. But next week, maybe I'll throw him on one team. But I'll tell you this right now, I will not be playing Johnny Manziel. You can play Johnny Manziel. Anyone else can. There's plenty for you guys. I don't want any. Falcons and the Giants was the next one, and you mentioned here you had it circled for big offensive production, rightfully so. Julio Jones, we talked about him earlier a little bit, talking about the debate between he and Antonio Brown. Neither one was a letdown, but in a low-scoring week where a lot of running backs and defenses let people down in cash games, myself included, if you had Brown over Antonio or Julio Jones, it made a big difference. But also if you had Odell Beckham, who I saw had a decent amount of ownership in cash games, he had a big game, and it was another one of those guys everyone's like, oh, Eli Manning can't get him the ball. And then we see week 2, he just explodes like we know he can.
Yeah, I mean, that was impressive. I mean, Odell Beckham kind of ranks behind those two that you mentioned there. So I feel like he's always a GPP play when all Julio Jones and Brown have the matchups. I didn't really have a lot of Odell Beckham, which I'm kind of disappointed in. I had tons of Julio Jones, which wasn't bad, but it was a letdown comparing him to those two guys there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you there. More of a GPP guy. And we saw another injury in this one. I should just say that before every game. It seems like there's someone got injured in every one. A fractured rib for Tevin Coleman, who looked good early, got his first NFL touchdown. I think he had 32 yards on 8 carries, something like that. But then he went down with the injury. So now you got Devontae Freeman, who hopefully people don't go too crazy with Devontae Freeman. We've seen him have the chance to be the featured back in this offense, and he's just not a volume runner. I'm not a believer he's the guy that can get it done. And the Giants don't have anyone that can run the ball right now, so that's a complete avoid for me.
Yeah. Hoping maybe Shane Vereen steps up a little bit in the passing game like he did this week.
Yeah, that's a good point because he was a great target. I think he had, what, seven or eight catches out of the backfield. So, and we've seen that before. I think he had 14 catches in the game with the Patriots last year. So it's definitely a guy that has some upside. Rams and Redskins, this was an easy, like you said, easy game to avoid. It was a game where you kind of had high hopes for the Rams, or maybe some people did. I thought they looked fairly good last week against the Seahawks, and maybe they turn around. The Redskins, whose defense actually looked good in week one. I kind of thought it was more of a product of the Dolphins struggling. Seems like they have a decent offense. And then Alfred Morris was not the big scorer here, like some people thought. We saw Matt Jones just explode, 123 yards on the ground, 2 scores. I mean, he looked great. And Alfred Morris, as we've seen, this is the guy who had the most success of his career when he was running the read option with RG3. Obviously, that's not a scenario that's going to happen anymore. So we saw Pierre Garçon, another value play, find the end zone. And on the Rams side, they might as well have scored 0 points because by the end of this game, no one cared and no one had the players anyway.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where the Redskins go with Jones from here because, I mean, you know, Deshaun Jackson's kind of their lone playmaker. And other than that, they're a pretty boring offense. Garçon, you know, not much going on there from a playmaking standpoint. Alfred Morris, he needs his volume touches to get anything going and needs to really luck out with that red zone touchdowns. But Matt Jones, he was explosive and looked pretty good against a pretty stout front seven for the Rams.
Yeah. I mean, he looked great in the open field. He looked strong. He looked fast. So that's definitely a guy to look forward. One of those guys that maybe it's okay to overreact a little bit on and get some exposure. I mean, like you said, the guy looked great, and this is one of the worst matchups he's going to see. So that's definitely a guy to keep on your radar. Dolphins and Jaguars. Ryan Tannehill after being a disappointment week 1, 350 yards and 2 touchdowns in this one. Lamar Miller got hurt, in case you're wondering who got injured in this game. That was Lamar Miller here. Lots of running backs going down. And Jordan Cameron left with an injury as well. We saw Jarvis Landry and Rishard Matthews, his go-to guys, both have big games. But the surprise in this one, to me, I'm guessing anyone who says that they were high on this guy is either a liar or didn't tell anyone. Allen Robinson had a huge game, mostly in the first half, 6 for 155 and 2 touchdowns off 12 targets. And the Jags, they looked good. I saw a stat, their first 1-1 or better start since 2011, which is really sad, but good for them.
Yeah, Jags actually looked pretty impressive, and they had a nice balance with Yeldon running the ball too, even though, you know, he didn't gain much, but he rushed the ball 25 times, and that's probably going to be the style from here on out as long as they're in a decent game flow. But, yeah, Robinson, he blew the lid off of it there in Jacksonville, and I can't see him doing that much more this season. I think it's kind of maybe a hit or miss each week, but we know that upside is there.
Yeah, and we've seen Jaguar receivers last year in particular have random big games. Allen Hurns did it. I think Allen Robinson had a couple as well. Used to be Justin Blackmon before he decided he didn't want to be an NFL player anymore. And by the way, that was another one of these defenses, the Dolphins, that let everyone down. Fairly popular play, and then we got on to another one that was an even more popular play. I guess I don't have the numbers in front of me, but from what I heard and saw, I think they were. The Ravens against the Raiders. Everyone, including myself, said Terrell Suggs is gone, but this defense is going to be fine. The Raiders couldn't even score until I don't know if it was late third or early fourth against the Bengals, but they were down by 33 points before they scored a touchdown. And then they come out and not only put up a ton of yards, but a ton of points against the Ravens, and they win the game. 351 yards, 3 scores for Derek Carr. Looked like he was back at home in college with the way he was throwing the ball around. And Joe Flacco had a big game, but he almost had to because he was down for a lot of this game. And Crockett Gilmore got 2 touchdown passes. Kamar Aiken had a decent game. Steve Smith, 10 for $150. But I mean, I don't necessarily think that any of these things are going to be trends moving forward because no one expected this game to be a shootout.
No, and I think, you know, you're looking at these stats and they're huge numbers, but you're looking at the way the game really played out. This isn't going to happen a lot more. You know, Steve Smith is probably going to be the focal point of the offense, but, you know, the other guys like Aiken and Gilmore, they're not going to be there each week. I'm a little bit worried about Forsett, though. I just don't think this offense is good enough to really let him get going this season.
Yeah, he was another guy that a lot of people were looking at in cash games, his fair price, and I'm sure he's going to have a nice price this week. I haven't looked yet, but that's a pass for me. I'm with you. That defense, offense, I mean, I know the offense scored a lot of points, but it was out of necessity, and it wasn't out of just, you know, being good, because this is a terrible Raiders defense, as we saw in week 1. Speaking of terrible, the Philadelphia Eagles offense, we didn't know if it was ever going to come. Some people like the Chip Kelly way. Some people don't. It really doesn't matter whether you're a fan or not, because if you're an Eagles fan, you're pissed off. And if you're anyone who played any Eagles, except for late, what was it, 7 seconds left, Sam Bradford, Jordan Matthews connected finally for a touchdown, which I needed in the worst kind of way in my cash games to get Sam Bradford anywhere near 10 points. And he did get that, but, I mean, I saw 24 quarterbacks had more rushing yards than the entire Philadelphia Eagles team. And if we ever saw that at Chip Kelly at Oregon, I mean, I think that he might just disappear and never come back.
Yeah, I mean, owners of guys like Terrence Williams, Jordan Matthews really lucked out with those late 2 touchdowns there. The Eagles are going to bounce back, I believe so, in certain matchups there. But Cowboys going forward, they're going to be an easy avoid with Brandon Weeden leading the way. No, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, if the Browns didn't want you as quarterback, and I mean, they desperately have always needed a quarterback, then I don't have much faith in that Terrence Williams TD. I mean, I had very little shares, and this is not to be bitter or complain, but I mean, they didn't even cover him. I mean, you had a guy in off coverage, 15 yards away from him, caught the pass, and he just kind of swiped at him and let him go. He just walked into the end zone. It was incredible. But yeah, that was a horrible game to watch. I mean, I felt bad for the Eagles. I mean, I have no allegiance either way. I couldn't care less. But I mean, that offensive line, though, that was the strength of their team, and they looked horrible in this game. I mean, LaShawn McCoy was getting hit before he even got the ball half the time. It was brutal. And then last game, Seattle Seahawks and the Green Bay Packers, and Eddie Lacy was the injury running back in this game. Obviously, Jordy Nelson already out, but this is one that we actually have some definitive evidence on, because we've seen James Starks be the guy before when Eddie Lacy has gotten hurt. And I mean, he didn't disappoint. As soon as Lacy went out, he just picked up right where Lacy left off. More of a speed back than a power guy like Lacy, but I mean, he went out and had a big game. We saw Jimmy Graham was terrible, but Randall Cobb looked like his old self. He got 8 for 116. So Aaron Rodgers did his thing and kind of trolled Russell Wilson afterwards, as well as saying that he thought that God was a Packers fan last night, which I'm sure Russell Wilson and maybe God didn't appreciate.
Yeah, this game was pretty interesting. I didn't have a ton of stock in it just because Seahawks defense. You knew the upside from the Packers wasn't going to exactly be there like it is, each week. But God, Jimmy Graham, if they're not going to use him, I'm not going to use him at all going anywhere forward from here. I mean, we saw last week 651 and a touchdown there. And I think that's going to be a ceiling going forward, honestly. And we saw last night his floor was very low.
Yeah, it was. And we saw now Chip Kelly, not Chip Kelly. We see it's going to be a situation with the Seahawks. I mean, they're going to have to really get it going. I was all over Marshawn Lynch. I had him in my cash games, and he looked great in week 1. And this was the Packers defense looked bad in week 2. Maybe this was somewhat narrative based because they wanted their revenge. And obviously, these have been 2 of the best teams in football for the last 5 or so years. So a little bit of a rivalry there. But I'm excited about James Starks this week. I can tell you right now that I will have James Starks in my lineup, assuming that Eddie Lacy's out for sure. And I think he will be. At least for 1 week, I'm guessing, but I haven't seen anything for sure on that. But that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Got lots of great content for this week in NFL, MLB, college football, a little bit of everything at dailyfantasycafe.com.